In this video, we're going to review solving quadratic equations by looking at the different methods that we can use to solve these equations and comparing them to each other. Over our unit of solving quadratic equations, we learned a few different solving methods. We learned how to factor, use the square roots, complete the square, and the quadratic formula. And each method is used when you're given a different situation. Factoring is used when the equation can be factored. After Algebra 1, all equations will not be able to be factored. So you have to take into account of if an equation can be factorable or if an equation is factorable or not if you're going to factor. The next method, the square roots method, works best when there is no bx term. So your equation is going to look like, for example, ax squared equals c. So you're not going to see anything being multiplied times x. When you have that, it's really quickly to just square root method and get your solution. Completing the square works best when your a value is 1, so the leading coefficient is 1, and your middle term or your b value is even. When those two things are happening together, you can complete the square and it gives you a really nice, pretty solution. And then finally, the quadratic formula is said to be magical because it works for any and all cases. And most mathematicians, this is their favorite because you can just use the quadratic formula and not have to think about any of the other methods. So let's look at an example, and we'll use this one example with all methods, and you'll determine which method works best for you. All right, so the example that we have is 2x squared plus 4x minus 48 equals 0, and we need to solve this by factoring. When you're factoring, the first thing that you want to do is identify if there is a common factor that can be taken out. And for us, we can take out a factor of 2. So when you divide out a factor of 2, you're left with x squared plus 2x minus 24, and that's still equal to 0. Once you factor out that 2, remember all that we are now factoring is our trinomial here. And since the leading coefficient of that trinomial is 1, the factoring problem is very straightforward. You're looking for two numbers that are going to multiply to get negative 24. But when you add them, they have to give you positive 2. Well, I'm listing the factors that multiply to get 24. So we got 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, and 4 and 6. And we're looking for the pair. Then when you add them, you'll get 2, but multiply to get negative 24. So it looks like I'm going to use 4 and 6, and I'm going to put the negative on the 4. Negative 4 plus 6 gives me positive 2. Negative 4 times 6 gives me negative 24. Sorry. Okay, so now that we know the two factors that we're going to use, let's write our problem in factored form. So we have our 2 in the front. Now this x squared plus 2x minus 24 is going to be factored into, first we know to get x squared, we had to multiply x times x. And then we said negative 4 and positive 6 are what I'm using. You only can do it this quickly if a is 1. If a is not 1, you have to factor by grouping like we did on our previous videos. All right, and so that equals 0. All right, this sets way for 3 situations, but only up to 2 solutions. Remember with quadratics, you only can get up to 2 solutions. Let's see where those solutions come from. All right, so from here, using the zero product property, this states, or zero product property states that each of these things that are being multiplied can be set equal to 0. So we can say 2 is equal to 0. We can say x minus 4 is equal to 0. And we can say x plus 6 is equal to 0, all according to the zero product property. Well, let's look at this. 2 equals 0 does not make sense and cannot happen, so that doesn't even count as a solution or couldn't even be considered. Next, we have x minus 4. Well, if we isolate x, that gives us x equals 4 as our first solution. And then if we isolate x in the second one, that gives us x equals negative 6. So the two solutions that we obtained was x equals 4 and x equals negative 6. Okay, let's use this exact same problem, but now we are going to complete the square. So to complete the square, the first step is to go ahead and rewrite to make it look like a completing the square problem. So I need to move this 48 to the other side. And the reason that we're doing that is because we're trying to complete the perfect square trinomial. Before we can do that, just like with any other factoring problem, we have to look to see if there is a greatest common factor that can be taken out. And since it's the same problem, let's go ahead and simplify or reduce this by 2. All right, when we reduce it by 2, we're left with x squared plus 2x is now equal to 24. All right, so all of that was just step 1. We rewrote it. Now, the next step in completing a square is to identify the b and take half of it. So for us, b is equal to 2. So if we divide it by 2, that's equal to 1. And then if we square it, we get 1. So half b and squared. All right, so that means we need to add 1 to both sides. So let's see what that looks like. We have our same x squared plus 2x, but now, according to completing the square, I need to add 1. So I added 1 on the left-hand side, and then I need to make sure that I do not forget to add 1 on the right-hand side. Okay, on the left-hand side, we have achieved, with completing the square, we have our perfect square trinomial. If you look at x squared plus 2x plus 1 and you try to factor that factor is really nice and clean into x plus 1 and x plus 1. You need a perfect square that multiplies to get 1, but when you add it, you get 2, and that is 1. All right, and that's equal to, if you add 24 and 1, that should give you 25. Well, if we remember our law of exponents, remember we can rewrite this as x plus 1 squared is equal to 25. And then now if we proceed to solve this, the next step I would take is the square root of both sides. To get x plus 1 is equal to the square root of 25. Remember, you can have two options. You can have plus or minus 5. So if I went way too fast, you need to go back to the completing the square video from last week, and it'll go a lot more slower on how to complete the square. All right, so we have two equations to solve. The first equation that I'm going to solve is x plus 1 is equal to positive 5. Subtract 1 from both sides, and that'll give me x equals 4. And then the other equation I have to solve is x plus 1 is equal to negative 5. Subtract 1 from both sides, and you get negative 6. These are the exact same solutions that we obtained as they should be when we factored. Completing the square, like I said, works best if your a value is 1 and this middle term is even. All right, let's look at the next method, which is the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula, like I said in the beginning, is very magical because you can just substitute straight into the quadratic formula. You don't have to worry about reducing any values, making it factorable, making sure a is 1 and b is even for completing the square. You can just go straight into the quadratic formula. So for this problem, a is 2. B is 4, and C equals negative 48. And if we substitute into the quadratic formula, it states that x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared which is 4 squared minus 4 times a times c, which is 2 times negative 48. Once again, there is a video on this topic as well that shows you how to substitute into the quadratic formula. All of that is going to be divided by 2 times 2, or 2 times your a value. All right, so let's clean this up. X is equal to negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 4 squared should give you positive 16. And then if we simplify this, negative 4 times 2 times negative 48 should give you a positive 384. And all of this is going to be divided by 2 times 2, or 4. Okay, continue to clean up. We should make sure we clean up under the radical. So x is equal to negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 16, and 384 should give you 400. All of this being divided by 4. Okay, proceeding on, the square root of 400 should give you 20. So x is equal to negative 4 plus or minus 20, all being divided by 4. And then this is where we open way for our two solutions. The first solution that we can get is obtained by doing x is equal to negative 4 plus 20 divided by 4. So if we simplify that, that gives us negative 4 plus 20 is 16. And we still got divided by 4. So x is equal to 4. That is indeed one of the solutions that we have obtained from the other two problems. And then the way we get the other solution is by doing x is equal to negative 4 minus 20 divided by 4. So x is equal to negative 24 divided by 4, which means that x is equal to negative 6. And there's our second solution. So there we have it, all three methods. If we go back and review, factoring works best if your problem is factorable and you like to factor. Make sure that you pull out a GCF before you start the problem, if at all possible. Next, we had completing the square. Completing a square works best is if you have it written as x squared plus bx equals c, so you have to rewrite it. And then you also have to make sure that this first number is 1 and this number is even. If that happens, it's a very straightforward problem to help you complete the square and get your solutions. And then lastly, the quadratic formula works for any and all cases as long as you have the correct a, b, and c values substituted into the formula.